How's it going, everybody? My name is Chase Teep and welcome to my channel. Today we've got a little conversation, a little debate basically, between two terms that I hear all the time. People use these to describe me all the time, but inherently I think there's a massive difference between the two, and that is the difference between being frugal and being cheap. If you're someone who tries to find ways to just save money and just not spend as much money as they possibly can and really try to live below your means, then you've inevitably been called one or both of these terms throughout your life. A lot of times people will actually even call you both of these things at the same exact time, when in reality, I truly believe that they are very, very different, and I want to talk about that difference right here on YouTube today because I think that honestly, one of these is a lot better than the other and a lot healthier and will actually lead to more money for you in the long run. But let's do it. Let's get into this cheap versus frugal conversation, and let's go right now. Alright, first things first, I want to talk about exactly what cheap means because again, I think these are two very different terms and I kind of want to define each of them first. I believe that someone who is cheap is just actively trying to spend as little money as they possibly can and just really trying to avoid spending money at all costs. No matter what it is that they're considering spending money on, they just won't. And I really do believe that being cheap is as straightforward as that. It's just someone who is unwilling to spend money and they just actively try not to. I believe being frugal is something very different. I think that really, when you're frugal, you do also actively try to not spend money. That's where the two are very similar, right? That's why people who are called cheap are usually also called frugal, and people trying to use those terms almost intermittently. They kind of mix in one for the other. And while both of them do share that one factor, right, that they're trying to save as much money as possible and just not spend a lot of money, I truly believe that the one thing that sets apart someone who is living frugally versus someone who is living cheap is that someone who is frugal understands that there are many things in life that do carry value and are actually worth spending money on. And that's it. I truly believe that this one factor that sets apart frugality from living cheap is really important and can actually lead to a much healthier lifestyle. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit more. Talk about, again, why I think frugality is better than being cheap. And if you're going to be called one term versus the other, I hope that you do kind of want to be called frugal more so than being called cheap. When it comes to the words themselves, I truly believe that actually the word cheap and being called cheap carries a much more negative stigma versus being called frugal. I think that that is actually something that a lot of people think is, something that's cool, something that they would kind of like to practice more, whereas cheap is just something that a lot of people dislike and try to stay away from, and they don't really want to pursue a cheap lifestyle themselves. And I think this really comes back to the fact that cheap people just aren't willing to spend money on things even though they are valuable. Someone who's cheap might just be unwilling to spend money on like a trip out with friends or just something that they're doing with other people and trying to actively enjoy that experience. But someone who's frugal will think that is actually kind of valuable, right? It's worth that money. They'd be willing to spend money on doing something like that and just trying to enjoy that experience. They understand that value, and instead of just being cheap and saying, I'm not spending money on that, they think this is worth it. I'm going to spend my money on this activity or this experience or whatever it is. And that's, again, the difference between the two. I also think that if you do try to just actively not spend as much money as you possibly can and try to avoid buying things at all costs, you might find yourself living a less healthy lifestyle versus someone who is frugal. A frugal person may see the benefits in buying a couple fruits or vegetables from the grocery store for their weekly diet, whereas a cheap person may just say, I'm not buying that. All I need are my rice and beans for every single one of my meal, right? They're not willing to spend a little bit of extra money for that value because they're just unwilling to spend the money. The frugal person instead buys the fruit and vegetables, and they really just get kind of a more wholesome meal even though they are spending a little bit extra. And that's one of the reasons that I personally just don't enjoy really being called cheap compared to being called frugal, right? I am absolutely willing to spend money on things that I value, and I am actively saving money, right? The whole process of being frugal, to me, there's a reason for it all. And I think that's another benefit of a frugal lifestyle versus a cheap lifestyle. When you're frugal, you're actively trying to save money, yes, and avoid spending money, yes, but you are also doing it all for a purpose. There's a reason behind the madness. Being frugal and saving money usually comes with long-term goals in mind, like paying off your student loans as quickly as you possibly can or trying to save up for a trip that you want to take in the future. It usually entails saving up your money so that you can spend it at some point in the future, whereas being cheap usually just says, I'm just not going to spend money on this because I don't want to, right? You're just trying not to spend money right then and there. And I think that's much more negative than actually doing it for a reason. Being frugal will also kind of challenge you. If you see something and you have to question whether or not you're going to buy it, that forces you to think about your values and if that's actually going to be worth your money. Whereas if you're cheap, you'll just decide right then and there, I'm not buying it. It's really a straightforward decision. And in my opinion, it's not going to challenge you very often. Whereas being frugal, you'll see things and think, is this worth spending money on? And that's just going to challenge your thinking and force you to make more decisions. And again, I just think that that's kind of a healthier long-term approach to financial decisions. And the final point that I want to make is that I truly believe that living frugally is going to yield more money for you in the long-term future and just overall than living cheap ever really could. And this one again just comes back to someone who is cheap. They're going to be unwilling to spend money on a lot of things, even if what they're spending money on could lead to some positive gains in the future. If you're cheap, you're probably not going to be willing to make like a couple $1,000 investment, even though you know that that investment could really pay off in the future, because right then and there, you're just thinking about saving the money in that moment. Whereas when it comes to someone who is frugal, they have saved money for a reason, and once it comes around that they can invest into something that will yield positive results in the future and will overall make them more money, they're going to be way more likely to actually invest in that, to spend that money in order to make more money in the future. And I know it's super cliche to actually say you gotta spend money to make money, but realistically, I think that someone who's cheap isn't going to be willing to spend money even if it will make them money one day in the future. They're just going to avoid that entirely, whereas someone who's frugal will, and that will lead to them making more money in the future. I really do believe it. I know it's a cliche, but I really do believe that the more money that you invest into yourself and into other things in your life, you will make more money overall. And that's the entire point of this, right? Instead of just actively trying to avoid spending money, save money, make smart financial decisions so that one day you can be making even more money than you currently are and just live a happier life. And that's where I think frugality really comes out on top over living cheaply. And so there you go. That just about wraps up this video and really shows you my thoughts on this debate, this argument between being frugal versus being cheap. I really do believe that being frugal and being called a frugal person is a far better alternative to being called cheap. I really think that frugality comes with a lot of positive benefits for you and for your wallet and for just all of the things in your life. And I really do hope that if you're someone who lives cheaply, right, just try to kind of evolve and take in some more of these frugal terms. Understand that spending money is sometimes going to be worth it. It's sometimes going to be entirely worth it to spend money on things that are of value to you. And you should really look into that alternative instead of just saying no to every single thing that you could be spending money on. See if it's actually worthwhile to spend some of that money on something that's worthwhile to you. If you guys totally disagree with me, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to see some differing points of view, right? To actually see if some people maybe prefer being called cheap versus frugal. That'd be a very interesting topic of discussion, and absolutely leave those comments down below. I would love to see those replies and actually be able to talk to some people about their viewpoints on this very subject, because I think it's a very interesting debate and it really does carry a lot of weight for people in this space who are actively trying to cut down on their spending and save as much money as they possibly can. Also, be sure to turn that like button blue if you enjoyed this video or learned anything from it at all. And the easiest way to never miss a single one of these videos, if you did enjoy it, is to hit that subscribe button as well. I upload every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'm sure if you enjoyed this one, you will enjoy all of those as well. So please do all of that before you go. But with that, I hope you guys have an amazing day, and I will see you all again next time.